Session 75. HTTP Callouts. The mechanism Apex uses to communicate with external web services, REST APIs, and SOAP services. This session covers the full callout stack: request construction, named credentials, callout limits, asynchronous callout patterns, and test mocking. HTTP callouts in Apex are used when Salesforce needs to send data to or retrieve data from an external system. Common use cases: sending a record to a third-party platform when it is created in Salesforce, retrieving data from an external API to populate fields, triggering an external workflow from a Salesforce event, or syncing data between Salesforce and an external database. The three classes involved in every Apex HTTP callout: HttpRequest, HTTP, and HttpResponse. HttpRequest is where you define the call, endpoint, method, headers, body. HTTP is the class you call send on. HttpResponse is what comes back: status code, headers, and body. Setting up the request: req.setEndpoint, URL, for the target URL. req.setMethod, get, or post, put, patch, delete. req.setHeader, content type, application/JSON, for JSON APIs. req.setBody, JSON body, for post and put requests. req.setTimeout, 8000, to set a custom timeout in milliseconds below the 10-second maximum. Handling the response: res.getStatusCode returns the HTTP status, 200 for success, 400 level for client errors, 500 level for server errors. Res.getBody returns the response as a string. For JSON responses, parse with JSON.deserialize untyped into a map, string, object, or JSON.deserialize body, your class.class, into a typed Apex class. Always check the status code before parsing the body. Named credentials: the correct way to manage callout endpoints and authentication in Apex. Create a named credential and setup with the base URL and authentication method. In code, set the endpoint to callout credential name/path instead of a full URL. Salesforce resolves the base URL and handles the authentication header automatically. The actual URL and credentials never appear in Apex code. Authentication options in named credentials: no authentication, basic, username plus password, OAuth 2.0, JWT token, AWS signature version 4, and custom authentication via auth providers. For most modern REST APIs, OAuth 2.0 or JWT token covers the requirement. Once configured in the named credential, the token refresh and header injection are managed by Salesforce. External services and named credentials are the two official Salesforce approaches to external integrations. Named credentials handle the authentication and endpoint management layer. External services generate Apex classes from an open API specification, wrapping the named credential callout in typed classes. For custom APIs, or where you need full control, write the callout directly using named credentials without external services. Callout governor limits: the three limits that define Apex callout architecture. 1. Each callout has a maximum of 10 seconds. 2. A single Apex transaction allows a maximum of 100 HTTP callout statements. 3. The cumulative callout time per transaction is capped at 60 seconds. If your integration needs to call out for 200 records, you cannot do it in one synchronous transaction. Synchronous callout restrictions: Apex cannot make HTTP callouts from trigger context. The reason: triggers run in response to DML and must complete synchronously within defined limits. A network call in this path would block the transaction unpredictably. The workaround is to move the callout to an asynchronous context at future, queuable, or batch. At future, callout equals true, the simplest async callout pattern. Mark a static void method with this annotation. Pass the data the method needs as primitive parameters. At future, methods cannot accept subject arguments. The method runs asynchronously, can make callouts, and operates under its own governor limit context. Limitation: you cannot chain at future methods or return a value. Queuable with database allows callouts, the preferred modern pattern for async callouts. Implement the queuable interface and the database allows callouts marker interface. Pass state through the constructor. Enqueue with system.enqueueJob. Queuable jobs can be chained. One job can enqueue the next, making them suitable for processing records in batches across multiple callout transactions. Batch Apex callouts. A batch class can make callouts in its execute method if it implements database that allows callouts. Each execute call is a separate transaction, so each can use the full callout limit. This is the architecture for bulk callout jobs. 200 records per execute batch, each batch making one callout per record up to the 100 callout limit. Testing callouts. The fundamental rule is that Apex tests cannot make callouts to live endpoints. If a test attempts a callout without a registered mock, the test fails with the error, "You have uncommitted work pending." Register a mock before the test runs with test.setMock, HttpCalloutMock.class, new your mock class. HTTP callout mock, the interface for callout mocking. Implement one method, respond, HttpRequest req, which returns a constructed HTTP response. Inside respond, set the status code, and body on the response object and return it. The test callout receives this response instead of making a network call. One mock class per expected response type, or conditional logic inside a single mock for multi-callout tests. Static resource callout mock, the shortcut for simple single callout mocks. Create a static resource containing the JSON response body. In the test, construct a static resource callout mock. Set the status code to 200 and the content type to application/JSON. Point it at the static resource name and register it with test.setMock. No custom class required. The framework handles the rest. Multi-static resource callout mock, for tests where a method makes multiple callouts in sequence. Map each request endpoint to a separate static resource containing its response body. Register the multi-static resource callout mock with test.setMock. When the callout is made, the mock matches the endpoint URL to the correct static resource and returns that response. Reduces boilerplate for multi-step integration tests. SOAP callouts. Less common than REST, but still present in enterprise integrations with legacy systems. Generate Apex stub classes from a WSDL using setup Apex classes generate from WSDL. The generated classes handle the SOAP envelope construction, serialization, and parsing. Call the stub methods directly rather than constructing HTTP requests manually. Named credentials can also be used with SOAP callouts to manage the endpoint and authentication. Common integration patterns. Callout after insert, trigger fires, and queues a queuable. Queuable makes the callout with the new record data. Outbound messaging pattern. A platform event or custom object record queues the callout job, allowing retry logic outside the original transaction. Error handling. Check status code in the response. Log failures to a custom object. Use schedulable or a scheduled flow to retry failed callout records. Session 75 complete. HTTP callouts in Apex. HttpRequest, HttpResponse for the call. Named credentials for endpoint and auth management. Callout limits, 10 seconds, 100 calls, 60 cumulative seconds. Async patterns, at future or queuable for trigger contexts. Mock testing, HTTP callout mock or static resource callout mock in tests. These are the building blocks for every Salesforce integration.